I've always believed I was in control of my own destiny. I planned everything, my routes, my work, my future. Faith was something my mother talked about, not something I lived. But that night, everything I thought I controlled slipped through my fingers like sand. It was a Saturday, a little before midnight. I had just finished a long day of business meetings and was driving home through a deserted countryside highway. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the pavement still glistened under the faint light of the moon. My eyes were heavy, my mind wandering between fatigue and the thought of finally resting in my own bed. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine and the occasional chirp of insects beyond the window. I turned on the radio just to keep myself awake, but the song that played felt strangely distant, as if it belonged to another world. There was something uneasy about that night. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavy, almost spiritual. I whispered without thinking, "Lord, take me home safely." Those words came out softly, but they carried more truth than I realized. Miles away, at that same exact moment, my mother woke up suddenly. She later told me her heart was racing and she felt a strange, urgent voice inside whispering, "Pray now. He's in danger." She didn't question it. She got out of bed, knelt on the floor, and began to pray. Back on the road, the silence felt thicker. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The headlights cut through the fog ahead, but the darkness beyond them seemed endless. My phone had no signal, no cars behind, none ahead, just me, the road, and an uncomfortable sense that I wasn't alone. Then, it happened. Something, maybe an animal, maybe a shadow, flashed across the road. My instincts took over. I slammed the brakes and jerked the wheel. The tires screamed, the car fishtailed, swerving violently. For a split second, I thought I had regained control. I was wrong. The world spun. The sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, and my own voice shouting filled the air. I remember every second as if it were stretched out in slow motion. The weightless feeling as the car lifted, flipped, and crashed again. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. When I opened my eyes, everything was upside down. The car was crushed, the air thick with smoke. I could smell gasoline. I tried to move, but pain shot through my body. The seatbelt had locked tight across my chest. The door was jammed. I was trapped. That's when I saw the first flicker of flame near the dashboard. It started small, like a candle. Then it grew. The fire crawled toward me, greedy, unstoppable. My heart pounded so loud I could barely think. I pulled at the seatbelt, twisted, kicked, but it wouldn't budge. Panic gave way to surrender. I shouted, "God, please help me." And then something impossible happened. A calm washed over me, as if time itself paused. I felt a warmth behind me, not the heat of fire, but something else, a presence. Then I felt it, a firm grip on the back of my shirt. Someone was pulling me. The seatbelt snapped open. I was yanked backward with incredible force. I didn't see anyone, I didn't hear a voice, but I knew someone was there. The next thing I remember, I was lying on wet grass, 10 meters from the burning wreck. My ears rang, my hands trembled. I turned my head and saw the car explode, flames rising into the night sky. If I had stayed inside for even 2 more seconds, I wouldn't be telling this story. I lay there shivering, whispering through tears, "My God, what was that?" Before everything went black, one last thought crossed my mind. Maybe my mother is praying right now.
When consciousness returned, I didn't know where I was. My vision was blurry, the light painfully bright, and everything around me smelled of disinfectant and metal. For a moment, I thought I had crossed into another world. until I heard a machine beeping steadily beside me. Then it hit me. I was alive. Somehow, I was alive. I tried to speak, but my throat burned. Every breath felt like fire in my chest. My arms were covered in small cuts, my head wrapped in bandages. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw her, my mother, sitting in a chair beside the bed, eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked up, saw my eyes open, and gasped. "Matthew," she said in a trembling voice, grabbing my hand. "You're awake! Thank God, you're awake!" I couldn't answer. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I squeezed her hand weakly. I had so many questions, but my voice wouldn't come out. All I could do was look at her and think, she was praying. She knew. Later, when I could speak again, the doctors came in. One of them shook his head in disbelief. "You're a lucky man, Matthew," he said. "When the paramedics got there, your car was completely on fire. We didn't find you inside. You were lying several feet away, unconscious, with barely a scratch compared to what happened. It doesn't make sense. You should have died on impact." I wanted to say it wasn't luck, but I stayed silent. I didn't know how to explain what I had felt. When they left, my mother leaned closer. "Do you remember anything?" she asked softly. I hesitated. How could I tell her that I had felt something pulling me out of the car, something that wasn't human? "I don't know," I finally whispered. "It was like someone grabbed me." Her eyes filled with tears again. She held my hand tighter. "I knew it," she said. "God told me to pray for you that night. I woke up and felt this weight on my chest, like someone shouting inside my spirit. I didn't even understand it. I just knelt and started praying, crying out to God to protect you." Her words echoed through my soul. That was the exact moment of the crash. While I was fighting for my life, my mother was on her knees, calling on heaven. As I lay there, I remembered everything in flashes. The rain, the fire, the feeling of being pulled backward, the rush of cold air when I landed on the grass. I could still feel that invisible hand on my back, firm but gentle. I remembered the peace that followed, the way my heart stopped racing as soon as I was out. Over the next few days, people from the hospital came to see me. Nurses, doctors, even one of the firefighters. They all said the same thing. "You're a lucky man, Matthew." One of them showed me a picture of the car. I stared at it for a long time. The roof was crushed flat, the entire frame twisted, metal blackened from the flames. No one should have survived that. The firefighter told me something that sent chills down my spine. "When we found your car, we didn't understand how you got out. The doors were jammed shut. And when we looked at the dirt around the wreck, we found drag marks, like someone had pulled you out. But there were no footprints. None." He shrugged, trying to make sense of it. "Maybe the impact threw you clear." I nodded, but inside I knew the truth. I hadn't been thrown. I had been lifted. Every night in that hospital bed, I replayed the moment over and over in my head. The fire, the seatbelt, the unseen hand. The moment when everything inside me went still and all fear disappeared. The warmth that surrounded me wasn't from the flames. It was something holy, something beyond this world. My mother prayed with me every day while I healed. She would hold my hand and whisper, "God saved you for a reason." And every time she said it, my chest tightened. A reason? What reason could there be for someone like me, a man too busy to pray, too proud to believe, to be pulled back from death itself? One night, unable to sleep, I looked out the hospital window. The city lights flickered below, and the moon hung faintly in the clouds. I whispered, God, if that really was you, why me? No voice answered, no vision appeared, but a stillness filled the room, a quiet peace that was almost physical. For the first time in years, I prayed, not out of habit, but from a place of surrender. When I was released from the hospital, the doctor told me I should have been in rehabilitation for months. Instead, I walked out with nothing but minor bruises and scars. It was as if the accident had never happened. But it had happened, and I would spend the rest of my life trying to understand why.
The night the car exploded, I thought I had taken my last breath. When everything went dark, I waited for the pain, but it never came. There was no sound, no air, no heartbeat, only stillness. Then, something strange happened. I could see. Not with my eyes, they were closed, but with something deeper. Like my soul had awakened while my body slept. I was above the wreckage, weightless, watching the flames consume what was left of my car. The fire glowed like a torch in the black night. I could see my own body lying on the grass nearby, motionless. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I knew I was dead, and yet I wasn't. There was no fear, only peace, an overwhelming calm that covered me like a blanket. The world below felt distant, every sound muffled, every detail fading, as if reality itself were dissolving. Then I became aware of something else, a presence. It started as a warmth behind me, like sunlight breaking through clouds. When I turned, or thought I turned, I saw it. A radiant light, alive and pulsing with gentleness and power. It wasn't blinding, though it was brighter than the sun. It was love. Love so pure that I could feel it. It knew me. Every memory, every sin, every regret. And yet there was no condemnation, only compassion. In that light, I felt words form inside me. They weren't spoken out loud, yet I heard them as clearly as if someone stood beside me. The voice said, "It's not your time. There is still something you must do." I wanted to answer. All I could think was, "Who are you?" The reply came like a melody inside my chest. "I am the one who pulled you from the fire." I heard the cry that rose that night. My heart trembled, if I even still had a heart. In an instant, I understood. God Himself had reached down through the darkness and saved me, not because I deserved it, but because someone prayed. My mother's prayer had moved heaven. Then, as if the light could read my thoughts, images began to appear before me. Scenes from my life, moments I had forgotten or chosen to ignore. I saw myself as a child standing in church beside my mother. I saw the joy I once had, the faith I had abandoned. Then I saw my teenage years, the bitterness, the arrogance, the nights I laughed at the idea of needing God. I saw my success, my ambition, my pride, and how little it all meant now. Each memory came with a wave of emotion, not guilt, but mercy. It was as if God was showing me, I was there even when you didn't see me. I felt tears, though I didn't think spirits could cry. The light surrounded me again, and the same voice whispered, I didn't save you from death just to return to the same life. I saved you to show others that I still rescue, still forgive, still call hearts back to me. Time didn't exist there. It could have been seconds or centuries. But then, something changed. The peace began to fade. The light drew farther away. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay, to remain in that love forever. I reached out, trying to hold on to it, but a force pulled me backward. It felt like being swept away by a river, rushing faster and faster. The brightness dimmed, the warmth turned cold. Then came the pain. Sharp, heavy, unbearable. I gasped for air. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. Machines beeped round me. My mother was praying beside the bed. The contrast was so striking, from divine silence to the noise of life, and for a brief moment I wish I could go back. But then, as she took my hand and whispered, "God brought you back," I realized something profound. I hadn't been rejected from eternity. I had been sent back with purpose. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the light again. Not to haunt me, but to remind me. I understood now that life wasn't about success, wealth, or control. It was about moments like that, when heaven touches earth and you finally see what really matters. I stopped questioning why I survived and started asking what I should do with the life that had been returned to me. I began to pray every morning, not out of fear, but gratitude. The same prayer that had once been a whisper in the darkness became my anthem. Lord, take me home safely, but until you do, use me for your glory. Since that night, I've never doubted whether God is real. I saw him, not with my eyes, but with my soul. And the memory of that light still burns in me, brighter than the fire that tried to take my life.
Leaving the hospital felt like stepping into a brand new world. Everything looked the same. The sky, the streets, the smell of rain on concrete, but nothing felt the same. The colors seemed brighter, the air sharper, the smallest sound heavier with meaning. I had escaped death, yet the memory of it followed me like a shadow that refused to fade. At first, I tried to return to normal life. Friends congratulated me, calling me lucky. My coworkers wanted every detail about the crash, as if it were just another story to tell over coffee. I laughed, nodded, said the usual things. Yeah, it was close. Guess it wasn't my time. But inside, I was restless. The laughter around me sounded hollow. Every conversation drifted back to that burning car, that unseen hand, that voice saying, "You still have something to do." I started waking up at dawn without an alarm. The stillness of those early hours drew me in. I would sit by the window, watch the sunrise, and feel an ache in my chest that words couldn't describe. One morning I reached for the old Bible that had gathered dust on my shelf. It opened by itself to Jeremiah 33:3. "Call to me and I will answer you, and show you great and mighty things which you do not know." The words felt alive. They pulsed through my veins. I wept, not from fear, but from understanding. God wasn't finished with me. From that day forward, prayer became the rhythm of my life. Not the formal prayers I used to recite as a child, but real conversations, honest ones. Some mornings I said nothing at all. I just sat there, letting gratitude speak for me. Other times I shouted, questioned, wrestled. Yet even in my doubts, I felt his presence. It wasn't the blazing light I had seen beyond the flames. It was quieter now, steadier like a heartbeat. I returned to church after years away. Walking through the doors felt strange. People stared, whispered, smiled politely. I could feel their curiosity. Is he the man from the accident? But the moment the worship began, everything else disappeared. As voices rose in song, something inside me broke open. I lifted my hands, tears streaming down my face, and whispered, "Thank you for bringing me back." It wasn't performance. It was surrender. Over the next weeks, I began sharing my story with small groups. Friends, youth meetings, anyone willing to listen. At first, I stumbled over the words. I worried they'd think I was crazy. But every time I spoke, someone cried. Sometimes an old man would come up afterward and say, I lost my son on that same road. A young woman once whispered, "I stopped believing in miracles until tonight." That's when I realized this story wasn't mine to keep. It belonged to everyone who needed proof that God still moves. I started volunteering with the church's outreach team, visiting hospitals, prisons, shelters. Every time I looked into hopeless eyes, I saw myself lying beside that burning car. And I would tell them, "You may think it's over, but God can still reach you." Some listened, some didn't, but I kept going. The same invisible hand that saved me seemed to guide each step. My relationships changed too. I sought out people I'd wronged, apologized without excuses. I called my estranged father after 10 years of silence. We cried more than we talked. Forgiveness became the real miracle, softening parts of me I didn't know were stone. Months later, I was invited to speak at a regional church event. Standing on that stage, lights bright in my eyes, I hesitated for a moment. Public speaking had never been my gift. But when I began telling what happened, the crash, the fire, the light, the room grew still. By the time I finished, people were on their knees praying. I realized then that this was the calling the voice had spoken about. Not fame, not ministry for its own sake, but testimony. To remind others that God is closer than the air they breathe. Since then, every day has become a form of worship. I see God in small mercies, a child's laughter, a sunrise after a storm, a stranger's kindness. I no longer chase success or fear death. I live simply but fully. And whenever fear tries to whisper, I remember that moment. The heat, the smoke, the hand pulling me out, and I know I'm held by something stronger than any fire. The man that left that hospital is not the man that entered the car that night. I lost my old life on that road, but I found purpose in the wreckage. My scars remind me not of pain, but of promise. They tell me that every breath I take is borrowed time, time meant to serve, to love, to speak hope into broken hearts. If you ask me now why I survived, I would answer without hesitation. Because God wanted a witness.
When people hear my story, they often ask the same question. Why did God save you? For a long time, I didn't know how to answer. I used to think it was because of my mother's prayer, or maybe because God had mercy on my ignorance. But now, after everything I've lived, I understand. He saved me so that others would know He still saves. My testimony is not about a car or an accident. It's about what happens when heaven decides that your story isn't finished yet. It's about how God can walk into the wreckage of a life and breathe it back into purpose. I know what it's like to think it's over, to feel the flames of failure licking at your heart, to believe you've gone too far for grace to reach you. I've been there. But grace doesn't stop at the edge of destruction. It begins there. The moment you think God has turned away is often the moment He's moving closest. Maybe you haven't flipped a car. Maybe you've flipped in other ways. Inside your marriage, your faith, your hope. Maybe everything you built has crashed, and all that's left are ashes. You don't have to pretend you're strong. I wasn't. When I whispered, "God help me," I wasn't in a church. I wasn't surrounded by worship music. I was trapped, terrified, and broken. And yet, He heard me. That's the miracle. God listens even from the fire. If He could reach into burning metal to pull me out, He can reach into whatever is burning in your life right now. The addiction you hide, the loneliness you deny, the sin you can't forgive yourself for. He can touch that. He's not afraid of your mess. The same hand that lifted me from the flames still reaches for you with tenderness and power. There was a time I thought miracles only happened to saints or people who prayed harder than I did. But now I know miracles happen wherever faith and surrender meet. God's mercy isn't limited by your worthiness. It's defined by His love. Every day since the accident, I wake up with a simple prayer. Use me, Lord. Not to impress anyone, not to earn forgiveness, but because I've seen what life looks like without Him, and I never want to go back there. If you're listening to me now, maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe you've been asking for a sign, something to remind you that God hasn't forgotten you. Consider this that sign. The fact that you're still breathing, still fighting, still searching, it means your story isn't over. The invisible hand that pulled me out wasn't just meant for me. It was meant to show the world that God's hand is never truly invisible. We just stop looking for it. But if you look closely, in the quiet moments, in the unexpected kindness, in the second chances, you'll see it everywhere. I want you to know that whatever has burned in your past doesn't have to define your future. God can take the ashes and shape them into something beautiful. He did it for me, and He can do it for you. So right now, wherever you are, your living room, your car, maybe even a hospital bed, close your eyes for a moment. Breathe, and whisper these words. God, hold my life in your hands. That's all it takes to begin again. That's what I said the night I thought I was dying. And today I say it as a man who's finally alive. You may not see the miracle yet, but it's already moving toward you. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that every tear, every delay, every dark road was leading you straight to this truth. You were never alone.